The following content is for information and entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed in this episode are those of the participants and do not represent the views of any third-party entities. In this minisode, I chat with Philip Chubb, who forms one half of the Mindful Mover, a movement and fitness company that he runs with his wife, Martina. Together they provide no-nonsense training advice, encouraging their followers to take an efficient approach to training, i.e. how to get the most out of your training with the least amount of effort. And this is a training philosophy that I wholeheartedly believe in and advocate myself. Importantly, Philip demonstrates that we do not have to train individual parts before we've fulfilled so-called prerequisites. With clever progressions and regressions, you can train pretty much any part of your body while using modified versions of traditional movement patterns. Understand that this does not mean Philip nor I believe that problem joints should be ignored. Rather, we believe that people should not be afraid of at least trying variations of movement patterns rather than completely avoiding them. There are far too many people in the industry claiming that movement patterns don't count as training one's joints. I've been coaching for over 22 years now, and I'm yet to see a human being who could move without using their joints. When you train movement patterns, you train joints. My thanks go to Philip for coming onto the podcast to share his insights with the listeners of this podcast. Please, if you get the chance, go and check out him and Martina on their Instagram. They are not only informative, they're also very, very funny.
Do it.
All right. So welcome to the Flexibility Focused podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. I love it.
Yeah, good. So for people who might not be familiar with you, could you just tell the audience a bit more about your background and how you got involved in coaching health and fitness?
Absolutely. So my name is Philip. I'm part of the Mindful Mover. It's a training company I run with my wife, Martina. And our whole thing basically there is trying to get a wider range of gains, so more gains and less time. It's mostly about minimalist training, seeing how little we can do and how much we can get out of it. So I got started off doing martial arts, and then I got into breakdancing. And one of my friends was like, "Oh man, you could probably do something called a planche. You should check that out." From there, I learned about planches and front levers and stuff from gymnastics. Got into a lot of different movement things and a lot of different training. And from there, it was all about trying to find the best ways to train, and then later trying to find the minimalist ways to train so we can get the most gains with the least amount of time doing the training.
Yeah. No, that's a great philosophy.
Yeah.
On your Instagram, you often refer to the big five. Could you tell everyone what those are?
Yes. So the big five is some sort of squat. So that could be a back squat, a split squat, or a single leg squat.
Yeah.
Some sort of squat, planche push-ups, handstand push-up, one arm chin-up, and the front lever row. And if you include those five movements, you can end up finding that you're making a lot of what we call free gains, which is by working on those five, you're gaining on other things that you aren't even doing. So by working on those five, for example, we found people improving things like their bench press, their overhead press, weighted chin-ups, press handstands, static holds, lots of different ab exercises like dragon flags, hang leg lifts, etc. So it's like you work on these five things and you're gaining in just about everything else that you can think of, and probably some things that you can't even think of just yet.
Yeah. So there's quite a big crossover between the movements. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. What do you think are some benchmarks of strength and mobility that you think kind of everybody should be aiming for?
So I think in terms of mobility, I'll start there first. Like I think really good everyone being able to hang. So just grab onto a bar, hang, and let it stretch through there. And everyone should be able to squat probably and be able to bend over like an RDL almost. Like that way you can pick up $1 on the ground and find it. It's kind of a good thing to have. Or you can get underneath something and squat it back up. You can sit in your squat as a resting position, and you can hang to fully open your shoulders up above you. I think for most people, if they get that, they're going to be pretty set. For strength training, I like to see most people be able to do like, at least a couple chin-ups and stuff. Because you have to pull yourself up move yourself around something, that's great to be able to do.
Yeah.
Some push-up work and a decent squat. Like for actually just living life, I don't think you need too much as long as you can move yourself around your environment and pretty nicely.
Yeah.
But with how little training time you can train with the Big Five, I think you can get a lot of gains in like half an hour a week if you want to drop it down to that level, and you can get really freaking strong. So that's kind of where we go from there.
Yeah, very good. I like that.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you about the concept of free gains, but you've pretty much already explained that. But what are your thoughts on the kind of parts versus patterns debate that's quite strong in the industry at the moment? So this kind of, we should be focusing more on individual joints rather than movement patterns.
Yeah, so it seems like there's this idea that you can't do certain things unless every individual part is clear to do that thing. So for example, like if I want to do a handstand push-up, then my wrist has to be able to go all the way to like 90 degrees. And as you can see, my wrist doesn't do that. It's like, what's that, like maybe like 80 something or 70? But despite that, I can still put my hands in the ground, get into a handstand, lower myself down to the ground, and go back up. So, like, if the theory is that you must have each joint working perfectly before you do a certain movement, then I think that theory is already disproven the moment somebody does that movement without having the perfect mobility and doesn't get injured, doesn't die, doesn't explode into a million pieces, and can still perform the movement. And I think a lot of people can do that, but there are some people who think that you should not ever touch any of those things until you have that perfect mobility. So, for example, until you're like, your foot is able to go all the way perfectly far back, then you shouldn't be doing squatting. And until your arms go all the way over, you shouldn't be hanging or trying to do chin-ups, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, it really doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if somebody comes to me and they want to do a certain movement and I assess the movement and they have an obvious restriction somewhere, and then I check the joint and I know maybe they've got a metal rod inserted into the joint and that precludes them from doing the movement in a certain way, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But this idea that you're say, for example, the split squat, your ankle has to dorsiflex to its maximum range before you're allowed to do the split squat is a bit ridiculous.
Yes.
You can use the split squat to develop that range of motion. It's I'm completely on the same side as you with that. Absolutely. I think it's, for me, I said in the most recent podcast that, like, I think for me personally, it's somewhere in the middle. Look at the parts and the patterns. But certainly this idea that you have to fulfill certain prerequisites before you're allowed to do the pattern, it's nonsense. It really is.
I find it is too. Like, let's say I have someone who they can't squat all the way down. Okay, so I say, based on that, can they split squat? They might not be able to split squat either on the ground, but what I can do is regress it, take it back, have them do a front foot elevated split squat, which is easier on both the strength level and the mobility level. And then from there, I can work them down to the ground, get their split squat on the ground good. Oh, hey, that worked, and made their squat good. That's awesome. Now, sometimes, I've had people come in and they're like, oh, I can't even do a split squat just yet. And I say, okay, that's great. Let's take it even further back. I've had them do something called a Poliquin step up to get their knees feeling stronger so they can lower themselves down. I've had them do things like calf raises to build the strength and mobility in the ankles so that they can go back to the split squat. And then once again, we just work our way backwards until we're at the point we want to be at.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a similar conversation with somebody a while ago about the Cossack squat. And they're basically saying that unless the ankle of the bent leg during a Cossack squat can fully dorsiflex before you can do the movement, you shouldn't be doing the movement. And my answer was, well, no. If somebody doesn't have that ankle range of motion, they can still train the Cossack squat by placing a wedge underneath the foot and then gradually moving the foot further and further off the wedge so that you're increasing that demand on the ankle joint. That way you can train that ankle dorsiflexion range of motion by doing the pattern.
It's like you can use these movements progressively. If someone can't do them yet, it's just like, let's just find a way to regress it and then gradually build it up to the point where they can do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't really get the whole like prereq thing where it's like, oh, hey, those movements that we've been doing for a long time? Well, we've decided that you guys can't do any of those anymore, until you do like all these different prereqs here.
Yeah, right. I mean, at the end of the day as well, people come to us for advice, but we can't tell people what they can and can't do. So there's really no, this whole thing, oh, you have to have these prerequisites before I permit you to do this movement. It's like, who do you think you are telling people what they can and can't do?
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy. So looking at the material that you put out, there's obviously an emphasis on gaining strength through the range of motion, which is fantastic. But what are your thoughts on passive stretching, and do you ever utilize it in your training?
So by passive, we're talking about just like sitting on the ground and reaching for your toes, right?
Exactly, yeah. So there's no load, there's no active contractions, just traditional static stretching. So yeah, hanging out at end range, as people call it.
I don't typically do much passive stretching at all, besides just like, I don't know, whatever I do when I wake up in the morning, I'm just like, crack, getting all the everything moved around. But besides that, no, not really. I mostly just do the weighted stretching. So like, my squats, my split squats, RDLs, things like that. And then if there's something else I want to obtain that I'm not getting from the weighted stretches already, then I'll do some work directly on that. So like, for example, for my splits, I wasn't getting that free. So what I did was I would do like a split hold. I would slide my feet out and then hold the bottom of the range for 15, 20 seconds. And then that would be my set. And I'd be like, okay, great, this is good.
Yeah. Brilliant. I like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Back in May, you put out a post saying that you can't get an overuse injury if you don't overtrain, and that people should avoid getting on the pain train. For people who might not be familiar with that concept, can you just share some pointers with them on how they can implement that?
Absolutely. So the whole idea there is that if we don't know what the optimal amount of training is. So like some people say that there's 3 times a week of training is the perfect amount of training. But then other people say, oh, it's twice a week. Other people say it's 6 times a week, as many times as possible. But the problem is we can't really tell what is the best amount. What we do know for like a fact is that if you get injured and so injured that you can't actually train, then that's definitely suboptimal. That's terrible. You're not gonna make any gains at that point.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is focus on making sure that we're staying what we call off the pain train first, and then on the gains train second. Yeah. So the way you can do that is instead of trying to say, okay, let me start off with like doing 6 days a week, twice a day sessions for the maximum fastest gains I can possibly make, and then you end up injured and broken and can't train anymore. Try starting off with okay, let's try once a week and let's see what that does.
Yeah.
Do we make gains? If we do, then great. Just keep making those gains slowly, just like that. Now, maybe you need like 2 days a week. Maybe you find, okay, let me try 2 because 1 wasn't working. Then 2 works, and you're like, okay, great. I can go to that point, use 2 times a week, and progress that way. And basically, it's about using the minimum effective dose so you stay away from overtraining. Now, is that optimal? I'm not sure. There might be a faster progress if you were to increase the amount. But if you overshoot it and get injured, you're probably definitely going to run into slower progress when you can't train. Yeah. So that's the general idea of that risk management there.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. When people come to me and they say, oh, I'm stretching X amounts a week, or I'm doing loaded stretching exercises, my flexibility is not increasing, my first answer to them is do less. It sounds counterintuitive. A lot of people think, oh, more is better, but it's like, no, do less, see how your body responds. And that philosophy as well of trial and error. I said this in a previous interview where I think people are looking for that golden answer. How many reps should I do? How many sets should I do? And I think coaches feel almost obliged to give people a prescription of exercise. It's like, no, encourage your clients and your athletes to experiment.
Yes.
And that's how you're going to find that golden number. Yeah.
I do the exact same thing. So people will ask, oh, how many reps and sets? And it's like, honestly, I'm not sure. Like, start at the bottom, work your way up a little bit. And that's what I do again. My coaching is we start at the bottom, we work our way up, and then we see like, where's that point we start making gains? Great, there it is. Okay, let's go from there. As opposed to being like, do 5x5 and 2 times a week, and you're gonna be great. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. We've already touched on some of the issues in the health and fitness industry, but what do you think are some of the biggest problems in the industry at the moment?
I think one of the biggest ones would be the lack of testing things. And I think the way people think testing has to go is that it has to be done in some sort of lab. Like there has to be white coats and like clipboards, and if those things aren't there, it's not a test. It's like, no, we can run a test ourselves. It requires two things to be a scientific theory. One is a criteria for disconfirmation. So if I have a theory, I need to have a way to prove that theory is incorrect. So let's say I believe that I cannot get more mobile with 1 time a week stretching, something like that.
Yeah.
And then the criteria for disconfirmation would be if I can stretch and get more mobile with 1 session a week, then I know that that theory was incorrect.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that a scientific theory would need. Number 2 would be an ability to replicate it. So I should take my experiment and give it to you, and then you should be able to do the same thing, test it, and see if it works for you, and then if it works for your trainees, and then they should be able to work see with their friends, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. So I think one of the problems is that if you are testing, or sorry, if you a lot of people aren't testing, they're not trying that kind of test out for themselves and seeing if it works. So instead, you have people who are like, oh no, you didn't do that in a lab, so it doesn't make sense. I've literally had people say, oh, so you tested it out on you and your trainees, and you think that applies to everybody? And I'm like, what do you think they're doing in the labs? They're doing the same kind of testing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest one, I think. It's just like the emphasis on blind beliefs rather than putting those beliefs to the test and seeing if they deserve to be believed in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I like about your content is that you advocate for phenomenology over prescribing to rigid systems. But people who are listening might not be familiar with what phenomenology is. So can you just expand on that?
Absolutely. So phenomenology is basically, I did this. What happened when I did this? And can I keep seeing that happen over and over again? So it's like, okay, I put my feet apart and held a middle split at the peak of my range. And I did that for 15 seconds. Then next week, for some reason, I was actually able to hold it deeper and get into an even wider split. Great. Now, that's the phenomenology. That's the phenomenon. That's just like every time I do it, I get deeper. Yeah. Now, the other part that people try to add in is like, well, it was because of the nervous system, or it was because of the muscles. And it's like, okay, that's great. Those things are cool. Maybe they're right, but then maybe they're wrong. And if you are wrong, you can sometimes end up going down the wrong path. So some people will be like, oh, no, it's a nervous system issue. So I'll try these other nervous system hacks, and that will be what allows me to open up my split. And somebody's going to say, well, no, it's actually a muscular issue. So if we strengthen the adductors, that will be what opens up the split. And while they're arguing with themselves back over there, I'm just like, honestly, don't totally know, but I do know that if you keep working on it, you're probably going to keep getting lower. So I'll do that, and I'll save the theories of that for the wiser people out there and the guys in the white coats. Meanwhile, I'm still here making the gains over there, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely, that's a great way.
That's phenomenology over the theories there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the theories have a place, but they just kind of point us in the direction of understanding what's going on. But when it comes to practical application, that phenomenology has to take precedence. Absolutely.
I totally agree, because I think I don't think the theories are bad. It's just if you follow that and you never actually put it to the test, it's like, okay, there was a saying, I forgot who said it, but it was basically like, if you see a man and his beard is gray, as in he's basically kind of old, then you can trust what he says to do, but don't trust the reason he gives it to you. So it's like, well, that guy probably knows what to do with something, but his reason might be like, well, little elves pull you down into the split, and that's what makes you more mobile. It's like, whatever, screw that. I'll just do what he says. And if you see a guy and his beard is not gray, he's younger and a little bit probably more in the lab and everything, you might be able to trust what he says is the reason for it, but maybe you don't trust what he says to do. He might not have tested those things over a long time. He might know the reason why.
Yeah.
The problem is the reason why may be right, but it may be wrong. We're not sure. It's like cool. It's cool to play around with, but just don't take it as absolute 100% truth. I think a lot of people kind of jump to like those are the reasons that these things are working. Just
Yeah.
be open to like, oh hey, actually it's a new reason. It is elves. Little elves pull you to your split. Great, I'm cool with that.
As long as it works, right?
As long as it works, yeah. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
let's make sure it works first, and then afterwards we can figure out why it works.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So a bit of a fun question.
Yeah.
If you were stranded on a desert island and you can only take one book, one piece of gym equipment, and one type of food or drink, but an unlimited supply, what would you take?
All right. So one book. Uh, uh that's a hard one. So that's actually the hardest one you sent me. When you told me the one book, I think I might take. Can I take a book series, or does it have to
Go
be
for it.
one?
It's your choice.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, so it's the Inserto series by Nassim Taleb. I
Okay.
love that series. It teaches you basically, like, for example, like phenomenology or like the scientific theories and whatnot. If you read that book series, it has a lot of information about those exact things.
Right.
So the order is Fooled by Randomness, Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, Skin in the Game, and then there's a fifth book that's kind of a book of aphorisms called The Bed of Crusties. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's that book series. I would take that. It's a couple years long read, most likely to understand it fully, but it's really good.
Cool.
I've read it like 5 times now.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
What was
What was the piece of gym equipment that you would take?
Definitely a squat rack with. Can I have a squat rack with the handles on it?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yep, squat rack with the handles. Because at that point, I got everything I need. I got the squats. I've got the handles for chin ups.
Yeah.
I can probably use the pins for coming resistance. I'm good to go.
Cool, awesome. Can you just expand on that accommodating resistance as well? Because I know what you're talking about, but some people might not be familiar.
Okay, so the accommodating resistance, what that is basically when you lift a weight, for example, the load stays the same the entire time. So let's say we're doing a squat. As I go up, let's say I have 100 pounds in the bar, and as I go down, I have 100 pounds in the bar, and as I go up, the 100 pounds stays the same. So that's the resistance. The problem with that is that we are stronger at certain parts of the movement than we are at others. So on the way down, eccentrically, as you lower down, you can handle heavier loads than as you go up. So like you might be able to squat 100 pounds on the way up, but you might be able to lower down 150. Now some people can do 175, they can do 100. There's a big range of there. And then at other parts, like they're even stronger. So for example, at the top of the squat, you might find that you can handle like 200 pounds or 300 pounds. And at the bottom, you might be able to only handle 100. That's why those bros in the gym only do like what we call power curtsies, because they want to use the heaviest weight possible, even though they can't go all the way down. So the problem is if you use the load that you can use for the full range of motion, you're constantly going to limit your entire range based on the one weakest point. So if I could possibly do like 300 at the top and only 100 at the bottom, then I'm only going to be able to use 100 pounds. What accommodating resistance does is lets me use different loads for different parts of the rep. So for example, let's say I'm holding the barbell right here, and then you come behind me and you put your hands on the bar. So then I've got 100 pounds on the bar. So I'm about to lower down, right? But since I'm stronger eccentrically as I lower down, you'll put pressure on the bar and push me down. And I'll resist until I reach the bottom. Once I reach the bottom, you might lighten up a bit so I can get out with the 100 pounds. And then as I get to the halfway point and I get to the point where I'm stronger again, you might start adding more pressure. So it's like 175 pounds there. And I finish the rep. And what that lets me do is get a really big training load out of very few reps.
Very good. Yeah. And again, it's that whole efficiency angle, isn't it? Yeah, I love it.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. And finally, what was the one type of food or drink that you would take with you?
Ooh, one type of food or drink. So I probably would take some sort of protein, since like you basically could use gluconeogenesis, I believe it's called, to like turn it into a carb and still survive. Because like if I take like my first choice might be like peanut butter. It's like I might die a little sooner with that. Yeah. So I love lamb. I might take lamb.
Cool.
That might be my choice there.
Yeah.
But I'm not. Yeah, I'm probably gonna take it with lamb.
Cool. I like that.
But I
Awesome.
would find out how to get off that island very soon.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll soon grow sick of the lamb.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I don't want to eat this anymore.
Yeah. Before we finish, can you just tell the audience where they can find you online?
Absolutely. They can go to our Instagram, which is our handle is the_mindful_mover. And they can subscribe to our newsletter, which is in our bio on the Instagram. We come out with one just about every week.
Yeah.
And they can also send us a message to mail@mindfulmover.com.
Brilliant. That's awesome.
Thank
Phil,
you.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you for your
Thanks so
time.
much.
You've given us some great insights. It's awesome. Keep doing the great job that you're doing on Instagram. It's funny,
thank you so much.
it's entertaining, and it's brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, buddy. Thank you.
No problem.
Cool.